Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Cultural Studies podcast. My name is Toby Miller, and my guest today is
Professor Emily Potter from Deakin University.
Prof. Potter. Thank you very much. And my father was Australian, and he was a big fan of Alfred Deakin, after whom I'm assuming the school is named, who had what I guess we would now call Alzheimer's, because he would, in his last years, underline repeatedly every line in books he read to try to remember what was there before going to the next line.
How do you know this about Alfred Deakin?
Because, well, my father told me, and fathers never lie. Didn't you know
Well,
that,
this is
Rob?
true. Yeah, this is true.
You know
Yeah.
that of
I
which
hadn't
they
heard that.
speak. Did nobody tell
No,
you this?
you're right. But that's not something that we're told at Deakin University. But Deakin is getting better at acknowledging the darker side to Alfred Deakin and is sort of allowing some ambivalence to be present around the fact this institution is named after the architect of the White Australia policy.
Oh, was
Uh,
he that? Okay.
Indeed, he was. Yeah, he was responsible for quite a few things, including the irrigation colonies that colonized the areas in the north of Victoria along the Murray. He's the guy behind that, and potentially that predated the White Australia policy, but it potentially fueled where he ended up going with it because his vision of irrigating this sort of like the arid lands, right, was also went hand in hand with peopling them with white people. So the agricultural project that he was invested in was a white one. So yeah, so Alfred Deakin's not the greatest figurehead for a modern university in Australia, but we're working with it as best we can. Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, tragic that he should be commemorated given these crimes against humanity and the planet, but very difficult to unname something like a university. Big problem with Rutgers in New Jersey is that it was named because this guy named Rutgers said it would give them squillions of dollars, which he didn't have and he didn't do.
Oh,
But it had been
I'm a
enshrined
liar.
in legislation.
Yeah.
It had been
Okay.
enshrined in legislation.
So it can't be changed, or not
Well,
easily
it
anyway.
could be, but not easily. And of course, lots of reactionary alumni and both alumni and alum AE are proud of having come from a place called Rutgers because they've lost that history or they never knew it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, names are very complicated, and the layering of names over things and what name gets priority. I often get frustrated with walking around my local area and just seeing all these endless parks, dog parks, playgrounds that are named after these white guys who lived in the 1970s or 60s or 50s or wherever they were on the council. And this park is forever named after them and no one knows who they are. I'd love to activate all of those names in some way, have someone come and perform them as a mode of subversion or something. That's sort of a subplot I've got going on at the moment.
I used to live in New Orleans, and one of my colleagues, an African American woman from New Orleans, only discovered long after she left that her high school was named after a slaver.
Oh, right. Wow.
And there
Yes.
are hundreds of streets, many high schools, and many statues to slavers, white men in these
Mm,
instances in New
mm,
Orleans. And of course, there are thousands more streets and neighborhoods in the South in general.
mm,
But, she grew up not being told that history of the name of her school.
I'm
A
not
friend of
surprised.
mine went to high school in Houston, a high school built in the 60s, Robert E. Lee High School.
In the 60s, wow. Okay, that's audacious.
Well, these people know no shame. Now,
Yeah,
we have to confront these questions that I pose to all my guests. I have to put them to you. May I do so now, please?
please. Yes,
Thank you.
let's go.
So, Tell us, if you would, what's currently impeding, dynamizing, preoccupying, interesting you.
I have to answer the preoccupation with the answer, my new puppy. I have I have my first dog ever in my life. She's a whippet. Her name is Pepper. She's gorgeous. So she's preoccupying me, but also I can answer the impeding question in the same way she's impeding me because it's very hard to leave the house at the moment because of Pepper. And I can't sort of do the things that I would normally do. Saying that, I am prepared to endure this for the love of this gorgeous little dog.
Now, you're a
So
late adopter, Prof. Most
yes.
people who have dogs when they're adults had them much of their lives. What's the
No,
scoop? How did Pepper enter your world so dramatically?
it has been very dramatic. It was a slow burn, fueled by my kids who are now in their early teens but wanted a dog for most of their lives. So somehow we reached the point where a flick got switched in our brains. We went, you know what? Yes, we need a dog in our lives. And I think it's an escapism as well, isn't it? Having a beautiful little creature in your life like that. It's just, yeah, just full of the joy of being recently born and discovering everything. And so, when one feels overwhelmed by the state of things, be that globally or locally, institutionally, I
Yeah.
can look at Pepper and feel
Yeah.
renewed. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and they do that for us like babies, massive effort, though less than babies, and massive, return of emotion and caring, like when the baby seems to smile at you or takes a
Yes.
step or any of those
Yes.
things. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. And that's what our animal companions, our fellow animals can do for us, I think.
I
They're
know.
quite
And I've
remarkable in
all
their love, their incredible, unconditional love.
absolutely also I've been very struck by the way that the presence of a companion species animal
Mm.
out in public is a community making force. It's an attractor. People come up to you, but not because they want to extract, but because they want to share in the beauty of this creature. They want to share their stories of their love for their own dogs. It's phenomenal. It's life-changing owning a dog.
I used to have a St. Bernard, and at that time I had a St. Bernard and a baby, and I was a chick magnet, a babe magnet. Totally trustworthy, man alone with baby and St. Bernard
Oh, oh
equals
my God,
not violent, charming, cuddly, kind. I didn't
definitely.
realize that these were props for decency.
Yeah, yeah. I'm rapidly realizing that and dogs, they are people let their guard down when there's a puppy there.
Oh my
I'm
God.
having conversations all over the place. I've met all these neighbors. I've lived on the same street for 10 years. I've never met them before.
And now people will talk to you, and well, when you're a man, obviously there can be an element of fear at addressing somebody. But there's also just the distance in general of, well, I live near you, and I might sort of wave at you, but I don't want to talk to you. When there's an animal there, it breaks down the space, doesn't it, Prof?
It really does. It does. And I mean, this is life. This is life. This is the web that we're all connected in all the time. But we just spend a lot of our energy policing boundaries to reinforce the absence of that, which actually should be recognized all the time because it's entirely what we need and it's entirely nourishing.
And this actually brings me on to a question about your work, Prof. Because I'm in the global south, I don't have access to a lot of your work, particularly books, but some of the articles and so on are available. And I read one in particular that really spoke to me. It was about, I think, a series of novels that I've never read, that I'd never heard of, right? So total ignorance on my part, but really interested me. And you use this expression, you and your co-author, Professor Magna, is it?
Mhm. Yes, yeah.
That I'd heard before but hadn't thought of for a while and wanted to ask you about. And I love cozy crime fiction.
Yeah.
And this in particular was to do with a series of books set in Victoria by Sue Williams. Yeah.
That's right.
I don't
Yes.
know these books, but I'm a big fan of crime fiction and I want to be cozy
Yeah.
when it's
Yes.
with an animal like a dog or a cat. Tell me about the coziness of this and how that plays out in the work
Mm.
you and your colleague produced.
Yes, that's something I enjoy talking about. So thank you. So cozy crime is a genre that has a long history. Agatha Christie and some of her contemporaries are considered cozy authors because there's certain conventions around the expectations of the reader. So the Christie example would be Miss Marple. So small village, crime happens in a small village setting. A little old lady who's constantly having tea and visiting her friends is the sleuth, and the murder happens against a backdrop of nice manners and cats and tea time. So cats are a big signifier in the cozy genre. And that's a very playful element of Sue Williams' take on the cozy because instead of the cat, she has ferrets. So there's a character in her novel that has these pet ferrets and they take the place of the cat. She's a very humorous writer, and so she performs the elements of the genre in a way that is entertaining and is humorous, but then also uses them for political purpose. So the series that I've been looking at is set in the Mallee, which is a region of Victoria in the northwest of Victoria. It's unceded land of many First Nations groups, a land that's been subject to much environmental damage and destruction over the years as a consequence of colonization, pastoralism, and agriculture. And it's an area that has also socioeconomically suffered in recent years because of the ways in which uh, agriculture has been globalized and corporatized. So townships are totally transformed. So Sue Williams' work takes elements of the cozy genre, such as small town setting, local sleuth, and inverts them in through Australianisms, very local Australian references that showcase various aspects of this sort of settler colonial malaise in regional and rural Australia. So the example is the small town is actually a town that's only got about 12 people in it because everyone's moved out, all the shops have closed down. There's one fish and chip shop left, and it's the fish and chip shop owner who is the sleuth. So the kitchen that often provides the centre point or the hearth for the cozy crime in say a Miss Marple here is replaced with the fish and chip shop, which is a very Australian, also English, but in the Australian context, it's a real kind of working class sort of place to get your food. And that's the sort of the setting for it, and what plays out with the murders in her books are often attached. The murders are often attached to histories of environmental and colonial crime in some way that allows the author Sue Williams to give voice to that. So even while the events that are happening, are well within the conventions of the cozy crime genre, the bigger histories that stand behind her interests extraction, water theft particularly is a big interest of hers, and colonial violence and dispossession, and also the enduring failure for colonial Australia to acknowledge endemic dispossession and genocidal acts. They sit very close to the surface of her humorous cozy crime works.
Interesting. I mean, my deep confession is that I don't mind adaptations of Christie, but I can't stand her writing style. I've never made
Mm.
it through one of her novels.
I have to agree with you there, except I was forced to study one in high school. But other than that, I don't think I've read one. But I also agree. I love the movies and the
Yeah,
teleseries. Yeah,
yes,
very enjoyable.
wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm more when it comes to writing style, I'd love to get your your take on the writing style in these novels that I'm not familiar with. I think that Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett are two of the great stylists in the English language with amazing contributions to the way in which English is written. Really astounding. And so I love that sort of, I guess, more hard-boiled thing, but it's
Yes.
partly because it captures an argot so brilliantly, at least for me, in the dialogue and also the
Mm.
descriptions. Um,
Well, an interesting thing about the that more hard-boiled genre is that in the scholarship that's been done on kind of the crime genre and its intersection with or capacity to comment upon environmental crimes, it's that hard-boiled genre that's much more illuminated.
oh, really?
Yes, and one of the reasons for this is the concept of the Anthropocene noir and the kind of like ecological noir that came out of Deborah Bird Rose's work in Australia and Timothy Morton's work in the UK. Both of them kind of somehow landed on this similar concept of Anthropocene ecological noir, and they extrapolate that in relation to noir fiction and that hardboiled detective genre. And so, an interesting thing for me and my colleague, and what we argue in that article you're referring to, is that cozy crime is often rejected or, not given much credence for having political capacities. But in fact, this Sue Williams series is a really good example of that genre being put to work for, quite powerful environmental commentary.
Interesting. Now, I wanted to ask you now next about a genre that in some ways is perhaps deemed more worthy, as it were, of critical attachment than cozy crime. And here I refer to your bravura piece on monkey grip
Oh,
in
yes.
Ghana. And I say worthy of more critical attention because, on the one hand, it seems as though her work is condemned for being too confessional,
Mm-hmm.
female,
Yes, very, yes.
right? On the other is valorized, particularly this book, I think,
Mm-hmm.
for
Agree.
not being set in a rural place, but being gritty, urban,
Mm.
true to life, reflective of actuality, and so on. And of course, although I've not read much of her work, I've seen the film that was made of this. Not perhaps not that long after the book came out. There was,
Yes, it was quite soon after. Yeah.
which again has noirish elements, I'd say,
Interesting.
mystery elements almost. So I wondered if you
Mm.
talk a bit about Helen Garner, who may be better known to listeners, perhaps, than Cozy Crime in the Mallee. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
that's right.
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about Helen Garner, a little bit about the legitimacy of what she writes in terms of it being gritty, but the
Mm.
illegitimacy because it's too confessional and girly.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, well, of course, Helen Garner's international reputation has just skyrocketed in recent years because of the publication of her diaries, which she's curated them, and they've been internationally published, and they were well received in the I think it was the New York Times reviewed them, or New York Review of Books, and they sort of went off in a way internationally, and I think Nigella Lawson put something on Instagram about these diaries, so that was like a real marker.
That's okay
But of
because you know a Tory duchess who takes cocaine and mistreats workers in her home is ideal as a person to endorse your work, right?
This is true. I mean, and if only to illuminate the vast differences between herself and Helen Garner. But yeah, in Australia, Helen Garner's obviously been celebrated for a long time. Monkey Grip was a very controversial book when it came out in 1975, I think, because it so explicitly depicted sexual desire on the part of a woman, and but also depicted very graphically a very messed up relationship between these two people. So between the protagonist Nora and Jarvo, her one and off boyfriend, who's a drug addict, and she's sort of trying to save and certainly save their relationship. So it was sort of a original material from that perspective, but it was also sort of celebrated and condemned hand in hand at the time because it did depict very, I say this in massive quotations, small lives. So
Right.
everyday lives of everyday people living in inner Melbourne. And there's some I mean, this is one of the things I love about the book so much is its attention to place specificity. And there are great passages where Nora will ride her bike down this street and then she'll turn into that street and then there'll be the gardens there and she'll see this tree and they're all named and they're all placed. And that very, very localized depiction and gentle celebration of local place was pretty unprecedented in Australian fiction, which historically looked to its valorization overseas, and so would engage with themes that were seen as more likely to resonate with international readers. So this was Garner going, I'm writing about my place. And the critique about her writing her life, which began at the time, I think when the book was first reviewed, it was reviewed very misogynistically, as, Helen Garner's just taken her diaries and turned it into a novel kind of thing. Um, but that attention to her life was received as whether or not it was celebrated or otherwise, as the original thing that it really was, because she was living that life at the time in parallel to what she was writing about. She was living in share houses. She was living in these suburbs. She did have a daughter. She was a single parent, and all these things are in the book. And she writes about, recognizable people at the time. And there's a great quote from Mark Rubo, who is still the owner of Readings Bookshop in Carlton in Melbourne, which is a very, very famous bookshop here. There's a quote from him that when Monkey Grip was published, half of Carlton came out immediately and bought it to see if they were in it. So it's such a local work in that way. But it obviously resonated far beyond the local. But I think part of that resonance is its attention to the everyday life of a woman, a young woman in her place. And the kind of meta life that the text has taken on is really interesting in relation to that because, as I've written about, there's so much interest in the houses she lived in when she wrote this book, and people jostle to claim, I lived in that house that she wrote. No, I lived in that house. It wasn't there. It was there. No, it was there. And so I was at an event with Helen late last year, and I got an opportunity to say to her, can you just confirm what house it was?
Ah,
And she said, it was this house. She's like- so yeah, I got it from the horse's mouth.
absolutely. Yes, this reminds me in the days when he was still acceptable, in inverted commas, if you went to see a Woody Allen movie in New York, people would point at things and say, "That's my building."
Yeah. Yeah, it's right. That's right. And that's Ghana. That's how Ghana operates. It's interesting. There's a sense of maybe it's a particular couple of generations in Melbourne, Australian life. I don't know if her work will continue to translate and resonate, but I would say, certainly people my age, I'm in my late 40s, people in Ghana's age in their 70s, somewhere in between all of that, there are these claims on her in a way. People love the frisson of running into her in Melbourne, of going to that cafe that she writes about. She's referenced constantly. It's really interesting. And Last year, I ran a literary walk actually in Fitzroy, in North Fitzroy specifically, which is a suburb that she writes about and lived in. And got a group of readers to go on a little walk through this suburb. And we stopped at particular locations along the way that connected into points across her range of works and had little readings and then had a discussion about what what these texts and what these words mean to people. And invariably it would intersect with their memories about living in this area or traveling through that area of visiting somebody who, lived in that area. Um, but it also opened up some very important reflections, I think, on the changing nature of place and on gentrification, because the areas that Ghana lived and worked in the 1970s that she writes about were areas that people without any money were living in. These were artists and writers, and there was decent social welfare back then. There were communal structures of living back then that just neither of those things exist in the same form anymore. Um, so she was writing about a particular time and place that also reflects back on our own as compromised by the neoliberal project and its related gentrification, waves of gentrification. So now these areas that she was living in as a writer, the real estate is, 7 million for a house kind of thing, which in an Australian context that's a lot. That's a lot of money.
This particularly interests me, Prof, when you say that in the past Australian authors would seek to downplay place. Yeah.
Mm, yeah, yeah.
Because earlier today, I was talking to a professor of horror media
Awesome.
about H.P. Lovecraft and Stephen King.
Hmm.
New England, their beat. Stephen King's barely ever left the place. His stories are very local, evidently,
Right. I didn't know that. Hmm.
but they can resonate with people elsewhere. So I find it interesting that you're saying that these diaries of Helen Garner's are well reviewed in the New York Review of Books or whatever. By being local, you don't necessarily alienate your readers. You presumably need to find tropes that can resonate beyond where you are without losing where you are.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Very well said. And I think that's absolute talent that she has.
Yeah.
And she's uncompromising about that. One of her most recent books is called The Season, and it's a beautiful work, a sort of a hymn to young manhood. It's about a season that she follows one of her grandsons at his football training, and she goes along to football training every week. And it's just kind of what we were saying about Pepper, actually. It's about the communities that are born out of these mundane activities that make up, you know, the lives of the lucky people that live in the West kind of thing. And she she finds friendships, she finds interactions with dogs as well. She finds interactions with young men, and she's at this point a grandmother in her 80s, and her reflections on those encounters, not just encounters, but networks of relationality
Mm.
are very powerful. And from that vantage point of being a woman in her early 80s, um, turning up to football training and what that means. Is she a voyeur? Is she,
I
sort of
hope
a
so.
yeah, yes. Well, I mean, certainly the she walks a really great line with celebrating this 15, 16-year-old male body in all its glory. Like she pays tribute to the beauty of youth in the way that, I was thinking when I was reading it. I don't know if you remember, Germaine Greer wrote a book some many years ago about young men and beauty, and I think she got into a lot more trouble than
Oh,
Helen Garner did about it.
I
So
didn't know
it's the
about that.
way she walks that line. Yeah.
When I was 15, 16, 17, I don't think anybody found me beautiful. This is really too bad.
Maybe you needed an 82-year-old woman looking in at you and not literally into your bedroom, but on the
That's
sidelines of
what I
your life.
needed, Prof. I
You did need
needed
that. We
Right.
all need Helen Garner writing about us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I needed, but there was no one there to recognize what I had on offer. But in all
Yeah.
seriousness, I think that is really interesting. I didn't know about Germaine Greer's book, but as you say, it can be a fine line, but objectification, often and quite rightly criticized, is actually part of sexuality often.
Yes.
It is
Yes.
part of loving somebody, wanting somebody, desiring somebody. Unfortunate, you might call it unfortunate, but it is there. Uh,
Yeah.
no
That's
doubt about it.
yes.
But if she's
And
allowing these young men to have their subjectivity, that's another matter, and that can be rather wonderful. She accepts them,
yeah, and
as it were. Do you know what
she
I
absolutely is. Yeah, I totally know what you mean, and that is what she's doing. And I mean, she spent her writing career kind of getting into trouble. Again, I'm using quotation marks, getting into
mean?
trouble with
Yeah.
people for um, for walking these lines. I mean, it's not just around questions like that, but she's become well known over recent years for her writing about court cases and true crime. And some of the work that she'll be in a courtroom, she'll make very sort of um, raw reflections on people and their physicality and the affect in the room and the movement of bodies and and it'll just be put there, it'll just be put there and it'll be done so in a way that allows the reader to encounter that, so there's not a moral framing put around her observations. Um, it allows the reader to come at these observations and walk in that complicated terrain of a courtroom, of a family that's been devastated by a murder, and she'll just sort of bring you there into that space. And when she talks about her work and why she loves writing about true crime, it's quite thrilling to listen to her reflections on why she loves being in a courtroom so much. It's just that sort of that interface with these huge institutions of power and then these just vulnerable individual subjects grappling with it. It's quite fascinating.
I've only ever been in such a room as an accused, so I'm not such a fan. And
No,
I
of
didn't
course.
really follow the script. I was told that I was supposed to say, I'm truly contrite, but I said, I feel really intransigent.
How did that go down?
Not well. And as I
Mm,
looked around the room, I saw every single person there, from my girlfriend through to the judge and the cops, pulling faces as if to say, he's an idiot.
why?
He's an idiot. Don't know. He's an idiot. Don't treat him badly. He doesn't know what he's doing. So
Yeah.
it was a
Well,
traffic offense.
you have to react as you react, don't you? You know?
Well, I don't think I was entirely clear about what the word contrite meant. Perhaps I should have looked it up before I entered the court. In any event,
Mm.
sadly, this isn't really about me. So I wanted to touch on something else that you've written, also collaboratively, that is in a way about place. And you've done quite a lot of work with other folks about regionalism in Australia. But this isn't about, in a sense, cultural production per se. This is about cultural funding. This is a piece you wrote called
Mm.
Activating Rural Infrastructures in Regional Communities. Maybe not the sexiest of titles.
Not, is it? We should have workshopped it. It wasn't a very sexy journal, though, Journal of Rural Studies. No,
No, it's not. It's not getting me
not,
revved up, I have to say, even with my glass of
yeah,
wine and the fact that it's 9 o'clock at night here. But it is about something very important in all seriousness, Prof. Uh,
it is.
in
Yeah.
any not just big country like Australia, but small countries too. On the one
Mm,
hand, the mythology of the rural as the essence of the real fill in the blanks. You get this
mm,
hugely in Canada and in the United States, but also in a small, pissy place like Britain, where there's
mm.
something not real about the urban, not real about Helen Garner's Melbourne,
Yeah. Very
but
good
authentic
connection.
about the countryside. And yet,
Yeah.
despite that ideology of authenticity and realness and a certain kind of white masculinity, there is also incredible impoverishment, mistreatment, etc. No? So
I
I
know.
wonder if you could talk a
Yes.
bit about that piece, and can you make it a bit sexier, please?
Yeah. I'll do my best. So that piece is about, it focuses on what is called the Silo Art Trail in northwestern Victoria. Now, so grain silos are pretty ubiquitous across the world, I think. So, but in Australia, particularly that southern Australian, southeastern Australian area, grain silos were generally built all around the 1920s. They're very imposing concrete cylindrical structures that I'm not sounding sexy at all, I'm aware of that, but
No, no, concrete
I'll
cylindrical.
good point. Yeah, okay. Um, and anyway, they're all over regional Australia, right? And because of the changing economics of farming life in Australia, a lot of them are unused. They're sort of abandoned. As this has happened hand in hand with, as you were saying, these socioeconomic shifts, you know, some towns, massive population loss, movement of people to urban areas, unemployment, et cetera, et cetera. So an answer to that, um, increasingly has been public art interventions into regional towns and the idea of deploying or using these silos as giant canvases. And again, this is something that I know has gone on around the world in different points, is
I
this
didn't
sort of
know
like,
this. How wonderful.
yeah, this
Hmm.
sort of activation of this existing infrastructure that's kind of transitioned out of its previous life and is just sort of sitting there waiting for a new one. So we look at this silo art trail that the state government of Victoria funded in, I think it started in 2019. And basically, in that first stage of the trail, five different wheat silos were painted with these giant murals. They were painted by really, this is where the sexy bit comes in, really cool, yeah, cool young street artists, and this trail was set up, which has become kind of a tourist success. So people do drive their car around this area and look at these works. But of course, there are always problems. And one of the problems with the trail as it was designed was that, as you know, imagery is never neutral. And the kind of images that were chosen for these works represented very particular versions of rural Australia, in that sort of way that you were describing, Toby, about a national mythos. So very, very white imagery, very stereotypical rural imagery, horses, stockmen, that kind of thing. Um, there was one silo work that did depict traditional owners, but there was limited consultation with community. The artist was not a First Nations artist, so there were problems with that. Plus, that one was put in the only town without any population. It's in a town called Sheep Hills, and the population of Sheep Hills is zero. So, in terms of, again, optics, putting the only First Nations imagery in a town with no one and no infrastructure at all, yeah, you can make your own judgment about that. So there are limitations to this kind of method, and I think in that article we discuss how kind of bringing in outside artists is not necessarily bad at all, it can be really great, but there were many opportunities that were missed in that process to engage with community and co-create narratives of place that would be more different, diverse, interesting than another white guy on a horse. So um, I suppose we came up with a set of recommendations in a way for public art on that scale, with that kind of economic interventionist mindset at work, that they might bear in mind going forward, which would involve much stronger capacity building in their region, in the local, and
Mhm.
um, into an engagement all along the way with people who live there and who have things to say about their place.
This brings me on to asking you about your books, Prof, which I've not read. I don't have access to them here. So I wonder
Sad.
if you would, in a sense, be able to educate me at this point based on my ignorance, which may also be something that some of the listeners have. And I'm especially interested in the context of the things you've been saying about a book called Writing Belonging at the Millennium, Notes from the Field of Settler Colonial Place. It seems as though
It's not a
it's
sexy
on.
title either, is it? Sorry.
Well, no, I think the four title's good. The bit after the colon, as the actress said to the bishop, maybe not so interesting.
Yeah. I've got a better title for my forthcoming book. I'm happier with that.
Oh, okay.
That's
Can
going to
you
be
share with the group, or is it a secret?
no, I can let the cat out of the bag. It's called Shadow Country.
Oh, big
I,
deal.
I, I
Love it.
think I think that's better,
No,
isn't it?
that's
Yeah.
definitely
Yeah.
got me moving. But in terms
Yeah.
of the one that is out,
Yes.
perhaps you could talk about
Yes.
that one that's out, but also about the forthcoming one. That would be exciting.
Yeah, sure. Yes, thank you. So yes, so Writing Belonging at the Millennium is an exploration of the ways in which settler colonial belonging is pursued um, in Australia through cultural production at a particular time. So I'm looking at the time from the early 1990s into the sort of the noughts, the 2000s, and that's what I mean, the sort of millennium years. And this was a particular time in Australian cultural life where there was suddenly, uh, amongst the majority, I mean, a heightened attention to the violence and horror that the Australian state is settled on. So um, there were some milestones that happened in the early 90s. There was the Mabo decision, which was about native title. There was a big report done into child removal amongst First Nations people called, the Stolen Generation Report. And these kinds of landmarks, they unleashed an unsettlement amongst white Australia that was registered in cultural production at the time in those years, an unsettlement that played out in different ways. So in some texts, I focus on literary texts, Australian literary texts in this book, but in some of these texts, that anxiety played out through a desire to make reparations, but so in a way that settler colonial belonging could just be naturalized and normalized and equalized with First Nations belonging, which I find very problematic, and many other people do too, particularly First Nations scholars. Um, and so there's that. But then I was also looking at other texts that worked with that unsettlement and that disease that was unleashed by those forces to reimagine a different modality for settler colonial belonging, which I argue is more generative to the extent that um, it's more along the lines of what First Nations people have called for increasingly publicly, which is a walking with. So not taking center ground, not um, not not achieving belonging as a means of maintaining the status quo, but belonging as a constant negotiation with what it means to live as a settler colonial person in Australia. And that's a negotiation that has to happen alongside First Nations people. It cannot be a project that the settler colonial person does alone. Um, and so that's inherently relational, dialogic, it's ecological, and it's unfinished. And the moment that anybody claims that it's finished, I think it slips into that terrain um, of being unethical. Um, so that book, in a sense, led to my next book, Shadow Country, which is coming out sometime this year.
Congratulations.
And that,
Exciting.
oh, thank you. Yes, I'm very fond of this book. And so this book is exploring it's taking more of a deep dive into particular places in southeastern Australia predominantly, but across to Perth in Western Australia. So most, so let's say southern Australia, places where colonial violence and environmental violence have very, I was going to say visibly intersected. It's not necessarily visible, it's more echoic. There's just deep, deep um, resonances of historic violence that are very present um, and also still being enacted in many ways. And so I explore the ways in which, again, cultural texts, and in this book, it's literary works, but it's also some visual artworks um, by settler colonial Australians um, are engaging with those histories in a way that, again, tries to recognize, like, recognize them, um, make them present in everyday life, not hidden, not shadowed anymore, um, not forgotten, and without that sort of fantasy narrative of the past is in the past, but they're active and live histories. So how these settler colonial works are acknowledging that and making meaning from that, um, as again a an attempt at um, a better way of being a settler colonial subject. I mean, I think that's a challenge of a post-colonial country where colonization is still an active force. Um, it's something that has to be constantly thought about and made present, that challenge.
What sorts of texts do you investigate in these volumes, Prof?
I I like writing about texts that don't necessarily seem like they're about what I'm making them be about.
Oh, this sounds like the hermeneutics of suspicion. This is brutal, brutal reading against the grain. We know all about this.
I take that, but I like to think that I'm drawing attention to something that the author intended, that the author wanted us to see in that work. So, so for example, an example of what I write about are a couple of crime novels. One is indeed a cozy crime set in Western Victoria, um, amongst the art world, and that's got a dog in it instead of a cat. That one. Um, I also write about. I also draw on contemporary literary texts by contemporary Australian authors. So all these books that I'm writing about are generally were published within the last ten years. Um, I also write about so part of my practice is I write about the pathologies of settler colonial culture as a settler colonial person. But of course, I do that in dialogue with First Nation scholars and writers. So while my focus is the work of settler colonial writers, artists to make sense of what it means to be here, um, I, I I draw on the work of First Nations authors to help me do that. So I write about Tony Birch's book Blood, for example. Tony Birch is a Koori writer from Melbourne. Um, and so that's a sort of a spread of text. And then I write about also in the book a visual artist called Linda Tegg, who, in my opinion, does the most incredible installation work with non-human, living non-human matter, vegetal life, as she would say, vegetal life. So an example of one of her works is she's collaborated with Noongar elder. Noongar people are the traditional owners of Perth to regrow a wetland, a native wetland, in the bottom of an abandoned shopping centre in the food court of that shopping centre. So
Wow,
this shopping centre was
amazing.
it was so beautiful. And so this wetland was grown with traditional plants that would have been in it had it been, if that land had never been colonized, it would still have been in that place, this wetland. And the plants that would have been found there were plants for eating, plants for medicine. And this work was presented against the backdrop of this dead, the dead heart of the modern Western shopping complex, complete with signs advertising pizza and, Thai takeaway. So just that juxtaposition of the commodified, um, sanitized site of food production in Western culture in the mall, juxtaposed with this living wetland that resides its memory its footprint resides beneath that shopping center, so it's been reactivated and brought back to life. So I write about Linda's work in that context too.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Prof, I've also read that you're one of the authors of Plastic Water, The Social and Political Life of Bottled Water. Again, not a book I have access to because of where I work, but I have read other works of yours about the environment. This bottled water issue taking up 10% of the use of oil,
Mm,
a
extraordinary.
huge one. Could you tell us a bit about the book?
Yeah, so this book was wanting to tell, or as the subtitle says, the social and political life of bottled water. So, with my colleagues, our collaborators, Gay Hawkins and Kay Race, we wanted to track how did this come about? How is it that we're drinking water from a higher oil product when this is, particularly obviously in Western countries with good infrastructure, there's plenty of available water, tap water for free. So how did this come about? And it's sort of an assembly story. So we track it through these different ways in which the life of the bottled water became possible, how it became thinkable, and then how it became materially possible. And one of the ways in which it became thinkable was the rise of exercise science and the development of the concept of hydration. So um, before exercise science became a normative sort of discipline and field and very influential in different terrains, there wasn't this concept of needing to hydrate the body. And as exercise science became more influential, the concept of hydration became more mainstream, then ways of hydrating and markets for hydration were increasingly, opened up and leveraged. And so, to get to a point where it's absolutely normal to go to a shop and buy a bottle of water, we had to have the emergence of the concept of hydration. We also had to have the development of PET plastic because only PET plastic can be is light enough to be mobile and portable. So the concept of a portable drink had to be developed. The materiality to support that had to be developed. PET is the only plastic that's that light, that is that clear. And there you get the intersection of semiotics. So you need a, a bottle infrastructure that is so clear and pure in itself, in its own materiality, that it replicates and conveys the material qualities of the thing inside it, of the water. So you needed that. You needed the rise of greenwashing because the reason that bottled water has been able to be sustained is because marketers realized that, oh, yeah, we've got a bit of a potential PR disaster on our hands here. Oh, yep, how about we start associating bottled water with good works? The most perverse of all is the branding of bottled water as enabling water projects in developing countries. So there's a whole suite of sort of philanthropic bottled waters that have an explicit agenda. Like if you buy this water, we're going to dig a well in Uganda or whatever. And I mean, even in Australia, we've had strong connections between the marketing of bottled water and breast cancer research. So one of our brands, Mount Franklin, routinely has had breast cancer research related branding where they turn their bottles pink rather than the usual blue. And of course, as we know, there are connections between plastics and cancer. I mean, they're just the sort of the complexity of all of these things is really
Oh,
staggering.
absolutely. I mean, here water is very complex because there are two reasons why you can't drink it as it comes from a tap.
Mm,
The first is that it has fecal material all through it, and that's true everywhere in Latin America, really, except Costa Rica. But the second
wow.
reason is that it has minerals that are very deleterious for animals, including humans. So what that means is, for example, for me to feed my pets, because of the amount they drink, I have to buy bottled water
Mm,
so that it's always there. And for me to drink, I'm drinking less because there's just one of me. I
mm.
have to boil it, then filter it, then boil it again.
My God. Wow.
You know what I mean? So this is not to justify the fact that I have bottled water in
No,
the,
of course.
but it's to say that this is one of these first world or global north creations that has some real benefits in the global south, not in terms of greenwashing,
No.
in terms of the dual needs of not having effective water treatment in many, many cases, but also having minerals that are quite natural that are bad for, us. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
I think
Yeah.
what you're talking about is incredibly important. And of course, the biggest criminals here are actually places like Coca-Cola
Yeah, that's yes,
and other
absolutely.
places that are
Mm,
not selling bottled water in its, in inverted commas, pure form that we need. They're actually
mm.
something quite different, aren't they?
Yes. Well, the book covers well, one of its chapters concerns India and the bottled water markets in India, which has similar issues in many areas to
Oh,
what you're
yeah.
describing, I
Yeah.
think. And there, so of course, without adequate public water infrastructure, people are going to need bottled water. But an issue there, and it may be going on in your place of the world too, is that bottled water manufacturers are taking from groundwater, they're depleting groundwater sources significantly. And like Coca-Cola is a big villain in this regard. I mean, they just, yeah, they move in and they just suck up groundwater.
Mm.
And so you kind of have this weird, we talk about it in the book as this kind of cohabitation of scarcity and abundance. So extreme water scarcity, really, but then you have all these water vans going around everywhere delivering water because it's come from groundwater from an adjacent town. It's not from Chennai, which we wrote about. It's from the villages within a whatever 100K radius of Chennai, and these trucks are coming in and taking the water from here. So this sort of the portability of water, the different infrastructures of its delivery, they all interplay in these really very complicated
Well,
ways.
one of the interesting things about Mexico City is that it has a neighborhood called Santa Fe, which is the wealthiest neighborhood in Latin America, or amongst those. And it's where every big multinational in the world has a huge office. It's not really a residential area. It's, a corporate executive stronghold. They don't have plumbing.
Mm,
So
really?
there are dozens and dozens of massive skyscrapers of the kind you would get in big cities in the global north, with trucks coming in all day long with water to provide plumbing services,
My
of
God. Yeah.
potable water.
Mm.
The complications and contradictions of these things are really totally amazing because this area where this astonishing wealth is located is in the middle of, because it was cheap real estate originally for developers, places where poor people lived, where no one bothered to create basic plumbing infrastructure. Anyway, if you do a second edition, come visit us here in Latin America.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. I'd love to. It sounds like it'd be a good case study, that's for sure.
Can I ask one more question, Prof, before I ask you to bring us to a close? by adding anything you may wish, and that might take the form of going over material we've already traversed, or it might be something
Hmm.
entirely new. Does that sound okay as a means of
Sounds
conclusion?
great.
We haven't been
Yes.
interrupted by the narcos.
No,
All
no.
gone
Amazing.
brilliantly.
Yeah.
So
Something smiling on us. Yeah.
I agree. So my last question, Prof, is back to Helen Garner, if I could.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you more about this fascinating story you told of taking people on a walking tour around where she wrote about, with people saying that thing of, I know that coffee shop,
Mm.
there. Are these literary critics? Are these people who eat what I've learned recently is called smashed avocado? Are these a literary highbrow crowd, or are these people on the walk folks you could encounter anywhere?
Well, that's a good question. I think we would say that they are probably, none of them were academics, um, but they were probably all, readers and read a lot. They're literary people, but in an everyday sense.
Yeah.
We did recruit them from our networks because we had a short timeline. But I have done other literary walks in regional Australia in the Mallee
Oh, okay.
with my collaborator Bridget. We've run different literary walks all around bodies of water, so along rivers and around a lake, and that they were sort of opened up to whoever signed up, whoever saw the signs we put up at the local library or whatever, and we got a really great cross section of people at those walks. So again, I mean, I guess they're people that have to self-identify as being interested in A, walking and B, reading, because we were going to be reading on this walk. But other than that, it was a group of people who got pleasure out of coming together, walking together, and reading. It was fantastic.
Lovely.
So,
Often those who have difficulty reading, maybe some of the footballers that Helen Garner likes to look at, who knows? I'm extrapolating from British footballers, many of whom don't like to read.
no.
They don't. It's something that a lot of people really love to do. And one of the dramatic transformations over the last 25 years is the huge percentage of people around the world who are alphabetic, as opposed to the past when almost no one could read or write.
It's
Now,
true. Yeah.
people everywhere can read or write, and they like to read about the weather, sports, gossip, stories, don't they?
That's right. They do. They do. So there seems to be this anxious discourse about the decline of reading. But
Nonsense.
people mean something very specific by that. But actually reading is not declining at all. It's growing, as you say.
It's like saying journalism is dying. This is the golden age of journalism, just not for people in rich countries who call themselves journalists.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Prof,
Yeah. And
I've
I
done.
think,
Go.
there's been scholarship done on, the fact that audiobooks are a form of reading. It's a form of reading. It's a practice. So yeah. If you think about people are staring at their phones, but they're usually reading something. There's some text there. So
Especially if they get a little bit older and they have to wear spectacles. Of course, my problem is, Prof, I'll put on my little $10 pharmacy reading
very
glasses.
nice.
They're fine, but one of my cats can remove them with his claws or his teeth,
Okay.
which he does when I'm trying to work. Alternatively, he positions himself behind the laptop lid and closes it. The
He
other
really
one,
doesn't want you to work, does he?
no, the girl is quite interested when I'm working, whereas the boy is jealous and just wants my attention. The girl wants to get in on the act, so she types. And things happen on the screen that I can't account for. I can't explain. She can make things occur on my little laptop
Mm,
that are
mm.
entirely mysterious to me.
Yes, I know what you're saying. I think I've had a version of that from my cat. It's kind of magical, isn't it? These little signs pop up on the screen. You're like, how did you do that? It's this must be their way of communicating with us.
There's a song by Joe Jackson called 19 Forever about not wanting to grow up, which I think was responsible in part for the end of my second marriage. And she manages to create a playing of this song out of nowhere, as if to mock me.
God, what would we do if we didn't have animals in our lives?
Oh, absolutely. I'm so lucky. They enrich everything I do every day.
So
Prof, to,
beautiful.
to bring matters to a conclusion, now that I've told you about divorce and pussycats and keystrokes, is there anything you'd like to add? As I said, it could be something entirely new, or it might be revisiting trajectories we've already passed through.
Something that has been going through my mind as we've been talking is the works of mine that you've referenced and that I'm very grateful for your engagement with. Um, Not all of them, but a lot of them are collaborative. And I think as I've gotten older or gotten along in my career, I love collaboration so much. I and I'm proud to do it. I think that's what I was thinking as you were saying that. I'm like, because you know how there's a culture in the academy of the person on the pedestal, right? And I'm proud to have co-authors. I'm proud to be a collaborator. And actually end Shadow Country, I have a coda at the end of the book where I discuss this because the shadows that I'm talk about in that book, you know, they're shadows that are about the the ways in which a place is never discrete, right? A place has shadows of other places in it all the time. The places where we get our resources from, the places that where violence occurred, that we feel is out there and over there, but it feeds into here. Um, So I talk about those kinds of shadows that come with a settler colonial state and in a time of climate crisis. But there are shadows in the academy, and and I think complicit in that is a culture that just venerates this idea of the solo researcher. It's kind of bullshit. And I think I have a PhD student who is always struggling with this idea of, oh no, someone else has said it, someone else has thought it.
Doesn't
And
matter. Be happy.
it doesn't matter. Be happy. And also, yeah, because you can't say anything that isn't informed by other people. No idea is just produced in a vacuum. So anyway, I think I'd like to end on that reflection. I'm a product of all the things that I've read and all the people I've worked with.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Prof. It's been wonderful getting to know your work a wee bit, and even more listening to you and learning from you today.
Thank you.